ahead of his decision to order U.S. troops to pull out of Afghanistan. Was the Vice President in full support of his decision to order that withdrawal?
Yesterday at the White House press briefing, there was a lot of time wasted with Karine Jean-Pierre. I don't know why. They're asking things like, well, there was one moment where they asked what Vice President Kamala Harris's greatest achievement was as vice president, and she couldn't answer. Oh, all the things. Okay, but can you isolate maybe just one thing? Well, the Biden-Harris administration, they work together. So anything we've achieved, it's her achievement too. Okay, but seriously, like what? It was painful. That was kind of funny, but there really was a lot of time wasted here, except for one line of questioning that I really want to draw attention to. Phil Wegmann at Real Clear Politics. Hey, can I just tell you, Real Clear Politics, I mentioned them a lot. I just called out Tom Bevan earlier in the program, the guy who runs Real Clear Politics, because they do a really great job over there, and they run a pretty lean machine. And they've got two reporters really working their tail off in Washington, D.C. right now. Phil Wegmann, the White House correspondent, you see him there, young whippersnapper, and Susan Crabtree, who has been covering the Secret Service like no one else, right? All of the revelations you're learning about the Secret Service and the breakdowns in Butler, Pennsylvania, and all of the dysfunction that's going on, that's all Susan Crabtree. It's like you would think there would be other reporters just out of the competitive nature of being a reporter in Washington, D.C. It's like Susan Crabtree keeps getting all the exclusives on the Secret Service. This is a great story. I want to get in on that. I'm a reporter. I'm a journalist. I know that there's a scandal at the Secret Service. For God's sake, there was an assassination attempt that came this close away from being successful. This is a scandal of the utmost proportion. Let me in there, but no one cares. No one cares. So listen, Susan Crabtree is like cleaning up right now. So these two reporters are doing a great job. And I really want to highlight what Phil Wegmann did here in asking some very pointed, very specific questions to Karine Jean-Pierre, because you got to be specific here. So there's three questions and answers that are going to be rock solid, deadlock important for this presidential campaign going forward. And you might not even notice it as it happens. But here's a little mild-mannered Clark Kent Phil Wegmann. Take a look.
This is a bit of a throwback, but the Vice President has said that she was the last person in the room with President Biden ahead of his decision to order U.S. troops to pull out of Afghanistan. Was the Vice President in full support of his decision to order that withdrawal and in full support of the way that it was implemented?
I mean, she answered that question herself. I don't have anything else to add. It sounds like she answered the question herself, right?
She said that she was in the room previously.
But didn't you also said she was in support?
No, I'm asking you if the president believes that the vice president was in full support of his decision.
I believe, and as you have seen them in the past 3.5 years, they've been partners, critical partners. It doesn't matter if it's domestic issues, also foreign policy issues. And that has been the case from day one and continues to be the case. I don't have anything else.
All right. Now that's really big and quite important. And I'm sure you're smart enough to see why. And I love Phil Wegmann's just sort of like checking off boxes here. Just want to be clear on this. Let's just get it on the record. As far as President Joe Biden is concerned, was Kamala Harris, as the last person in the room in the discussion about with the withdrawal from Afghanistan, did Joe Biden think that Kamala Harris was 100% in support of his decision and his policy? By asking that question and getting that answer, he has now locked the Kamala Harris campaign in. They cannot. I mean, they'll try. If it becomes political expedient, they'll try. But it is so blatantly on the record now and crystal clear. Thanks to that. Thanks to, so you got to get them now. So Kamala Harris refuses to do an interview. She's not saying a damn thing. Why? Because she wants to be able to wait until the very last minute to say whatever she needs to say to be able to win the election as close to the election day as possible. So what do? Well, what you try to do then is to get it on record now, things that she can't weasel out of. And I'm not saying that Phil Wegmann is in some way acting partisan or anything here or on behalf of one campaign or another, but I think what he's doing is sort of taking a zoomed out visionary look of the major issues in the campaign and just trying to establish the record in terms of Kamala Harris's participation with Joe Biden, because Bill Wegmann seems to remember what most people in the media have forgotten, and that is Kamala Harris is the incumbent. In fact, I'm afraid sometimes the Trump campaign has forgotten this. Donald Trump won the election against Joe Biden. He's already won it. But the message is no different with Kamala Harris. Are you better off than you were 4 years ago? And the answer is no, and the reason is Kamala Harris. In fact, they should stop calling it the Biden-Harris administration. They should call it the Harris-Biden administration, because God knows he hasn't been in charge. So now, as questions come up about the disaster in Afghanistan, and I sure hope in one of these debates they focus on national security and the failed policies of the Biden administration, then Donald Trump can actually raise this and say, well, listen, you were part of the decision that left 13 Americans dead. What kind of advice did you give Joe Biden? And because of that single question, Phil Wegmann has locked Kamala Harris in now. I assure you, there's a couple more here, but I assure you, the Kamala Harris for President team, the comms team watching this briefing, they were not happy with how this went. There's a little more.
Sure.
You've noted how the vice president has been a partner in all of the heavy lifts over these last 3.5 years. Given that they've worked so closely together in that time, what does the president see as the vice president's biggest achievement during their time in office together?
So look, because they've been partners, those achievements have been done. Certainly, those historic, unprecedented achievements have been done together. I'll say this: the president believes in the vice president leadership, her temperament, her experience, and he has said this himself. One of the proudest decisions that he made in 2020 was selecting her as vice president, because he believed that she can go on day one. And you've seen them do that together on day one of this administration. That doesn't change. I'm not going to parse out anything from here. They have been partners. She's been a critical partner for this president for during this term, and will continue to do so. You will see them together on Thursday in Maryland, where they would talk about their next announcement on lowering costs for the American people.
Yeah. By the way, on Thursday, they're going to have a joint campaign appearance. Joe Biden's going to campaign for Kamala Harris in Maryland. For those of you who don't know it, I'm sure you do. Maryland is literally Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. was carved out of Maryland. He's going to Prince George's County, Maryland. That is literally just across the border of Washington, D.C. He is traveling, I believe, 20 miles from the White House to campaign. But that was the question and answer that I alluded to earlier, that there's no daylight between the two of them. So considering she's been such a partner to Joe Biden, can you point to one specific area where she's, been the best? She can't. And there's more. Here, take a look.
There's not a specific policy achievement. It's a comprehensive whole.
I would say it's a comprehensive whole. Our accomplishments here, the Biden-Harris accomplishments, are the Biden-Harris accomplishments. She's played a role, whether it is being on the floor of the Senate, right, getting really important legislations to pass through, right, or being in the room with the president on trying to figure out how to move forward strategically with the policy, or how to make tough decisions on behalf of the American people. She's been there. She has been there. These have been, and we've had, as you know, important moments, historic moments, and she's been a critical partner.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely a critical partner. All right. Well, great job, Phil Wegmann, because understand what he did there. He laid a foundation to go forward. And this is so important. If you're Kamala Harris, you have to run against Joe Biden to a certain respect. You're already seeing this. You're already seeing this with her saying, I want to remove, I'm for not taxing tipped wages. Where the hell have you been the last 3.5 years? Why did you cast the deciding vote to increase the number of IRS agents who then made it more difficult to not report your wages, your tipped wages, who actually put new protocols in for tipped employees to have to submit their tips and wages. And in fact, what's stopping you from doing it right now? Nothing is stopping you from doing it right now. You're running on a secure border and you're going to hunker down on the border. But so she's already starting when she said, oh, things are too expensive right now. The cost of living is too high. Biden, up until the moment he dropped out, was suggesting that this is the strongest economy in the world. You notice how you don't hear that language anymore from Kamala Harris. So she's already been attempting to separate herself from Biden. We've had a history of vice presidents running for president while the current president is still in office, right? A very brief history, but let me remind you of the last couple of times this has happened. And let me be really clear here. It's very rare that a sitting vice president wins election when they're in office. All right. Al Gore tried to do this in 2000 and he lost. It was close, but he lost to George W. Bush. Hubert Humphrey tried to do this in 1968, running as Lyndon Johnson's running mate, and he lost. Richard Nixon tried to do this, running as Dwight Eisenhower's running mate in 1960, and he lost. And before that, you got to go back to pre-Roosevelt. Why is this important? And the only one who was successful in doing it, there's only one vice president, I believe, in our history. No, that's not true. John Adams. Sorry. So there are only two successful vice presidents, sitting vice presidents, running while their boss, the president, was an incumbent and termed out, who have successfully run for election as president. George Herbert Walker Bush in 1988 and John Adams in 1800. And they were both running basically as the third term of their boss. John Adams was running as George Washington's third term, and George Bush ran as Ronald Reagan's third term. And by the way, that's all they got. Neither of them won re-election either. Now, part of that is because the American people, generally speaking, don't like to have successive, 12 years of one party is about enough. Roosevelt was an outlier there, right? Generally speaking, the American people like every 4 or 8 years at the most to switch off. It's very rare that they'll stick with the same party for 12 years, God forbid. If you notice that, just look at the ebb and flow and the pattern of just the last 100 years. That's just how things have gone. But that's part of the reason. The other part is it's politically very, very difficult. See, Hubert Humphrey, when he was running as the vice president to Lyndon Johnson was incredibly unpopular, mostly because of the Vietnam War. He was unpopular on the left because of the Vietnam War, and he was unpopular on the right because of the Vietnam War. And when you're running as the vice president, you have to take all the baggage that the president has. You'd think it would be an advantage. Oh, he's the vice president. And there are some advantages. You can fly around on government planes instead of having to pay for your campaign plane, and you get, the trappings of the office. But there's also a huge anchor around your ankle. You are tied to that administration. You're tied to that administration's policies. Now, if the administration is incredibly popular, as it was with Ronald Reagan and George Washington, you benefit from that, as Bush and Adams did. But if they're not, as Joe Biden isn't, then you have to recognize that at some point, Kamala Harris has to try to figure out a way to separate herself from the unpopular aspects of the Biden presidency. She needs to be able to have an arm's length distance. She needs to be able to say, yeah, listen, I was a loyal vice president to Joe Biden, but on this we differ. On this we disagree, but he was the president and he won out. He was able to say, well, okay, I respectfully disagree with you on that, Madam Vice President, but I'm the president. I'm going to make this decision. She could have done that on Afghanistan. She could have said, listen, this was against my judgment, but he had the final say. He's the commander in chief, and that's how we left it. But That question and answer right there with Phil Wegmann in the White House yesterday prevents it, because now the Biden administration is on record saying Kamala's with us all the way. By pressing Karine Jean-Pierre yesterday and saying, well, can you tell us one specific achievement? Most of the people looked at that response and said, look, Karine Jean-Pierre can't even name one achievement that Kamala Harris had. That's embarrassing, right? And yeah, that's good for a laugh line. But what's more important politically is that Karine Jean-Pierre couldn't just leave it at that. Instead, she had to say, well, all of it, every single historic achievement of the Biden administration is married, glued together, stitched together irrevocably with Kamala Harris. Everything we did, she did. We are lockstep. And that is devastating for them politically. They're stuck. They're boxed in. Kamala Harris cannot separate herself from anything that this administration did. And now it's up to the Trump campaign. It's up to the Trump campaign to get back to basics on this and remind the American people just how miserable they are. Forget about all the joy of Kamala Harris's rallies and the AI crowds and the photo enhancements and all of the TikTok videos and the brat summer, and stop whining about the fact that she won't sit with reporters. We'll do the whining for you. You're above that. You're the candidate. Get back to the basics. Your eggs cost $5. Your gas cost $8. Everything about your life right now is harder because of her. And we're also on the brink of World War III. And this isn't just Joe Biden's fault, because everything that Joe Biden has done, he did in lockstep with Kamala Harris. She was there every step of the way. She was always the last person in the room. And they made every decision together. This is the Harris-Biden administration. And your misery right now is Kamala Harris's fault. If not, why didn't she do something? Why didn't she say something? If she disagrees with something that the Biden administration has done in the last 3.5 years, let's hear it from her right now, today. Tell us, how do you differ from the Joe Biden policies that you've enabled for the last 3.5 years? It's that simple. Oh, you can't, can you? Because Joe Biden, through his spokesman, just threw you under the bus. Glorious. And great job, Phil Wegmann, Real Clear Politics. Nice job. You snot-nosed little brat.